The City Council will hold a public hearing on the residential factor and residential exemption for the FY 2017 tax rate.
Mr. O'Brien, our city assessor, would you please come to the podium? And if you'd state your name and occupation for the record.
James O'Brien, assessor for the city of Malden.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Proceed with your presentation.
Good evening, councilors. This is our tax classification hearing, which is a required public hearing each fiscal year where your body, council, along with input from the administration, has to decide and consider and then ultimately vote on a couple of matters that pertain to how property in the city of Malden is taxed. Malden has approximately 13,450 properties, and tax bills are calculated by multiplying assessed values by tax rate. And setting of the tax rate is the first item on the agenda for you folks tonight to consider. But before you do, I just want to take a minute and address the other piece of that equation. Again, assessed value multiplied times tax rate. So assessed values are the responsibility of this office, the assessors, and all procedures and processes that we do are overseen, examined, and ultimately audited by the state agency that oversees us, which is the Department of Revenue. Simply stated, on our assessed values, the real estate market really dictates how we adjust values each year. Study the market, adjust values. I was here at a time when we did lower values. I know no one believes that, but we did back in 2000, I think 2001, because the market warranted it. We're fortunate we have ample sales in the city, probably 500 or 600 each year, which is about a 5% turnover in the housing stock. And again, the market information that we use is for the majority of Malden properties, meaning single-family, two-family, three-family, and residential condominium. I say residential because there are a handful of commercial condos. So it's the sales out there that take place that dictate how we assess, put value on the properties. I did include in your package some data about changes in value, which again is all based on what the market did here in the previous year. I probably should point out that today's assessed values are based on sales from a previous year, and the properties that actually sell today will be the data we'll be using in fiscal 18. Unless anyone had any questions on the assessed value and that market work that we do, I would say we'd like to move on to the first item on your agenda, which is to consider a tax rate, or actually tax rates. And hearing and seeing no questions on the assessed value portion. On our tax rate, let me see, we have a couple of different scenarios. If we were to take the total value of the city, which is about, I think, $6.5 billion, and divide it by our levy this year being around $82 million, the division of those two numbers produces a tax rate, and that's known as a single rate. That means every property in the city, whether it's commercial or residential, would pay the same rate. Malden, like most cities and urban areas and inside of 128, has availed himself to what's known as shifter rate. And what that does is it puts more burden on the commercial class of taxpayer to the benefit of the residential. Historically, Malden has shifted to the legal maximum amount, which is 1.75. Another way that can be expressed, when the residential taxpayer pays $1, the commercial pays $1.75. Each of those properties still stands on their own merit in terms of their value. We're just discussing the tax rate here. So the recommendation from the Board of Assessors is that you would continue to set a tax rate recognizing a 1.75 shift. And if you were to agree with that, your residential tax rate would be $11.30, and the commercial rate would be $22.04. Now, there's going to be a secondary discussion about our residential exemption, and the rates that I just quoted you are just initially talking about the shift. We will then talk about some other rates when we introduce the residential exemption. So again, if there was no shift at all, the rate for everyone in the city would be $12.60. If you choose to go to the 1.75 as you have in the last, I think, 20, 25 years, the residential rate would be $11.30. Commercial rate would be $22.04. I'm going to stop now, just if there's any comments or questions. Again, we still have a discussion about the residential exemption.
Mr. O'Brien, I don't have any lights on here, so I think you're free to, you have a general question? One second, Councilor O'Malley. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam President. On page 3 of the tax rate, line 4, it says payment in lieu of taxes. Who's paying, who has a pilot program?
I have to check, Counselor. I think possibly the Malden Redevelopment Authority. I'm not certain of that. Or the housing, either the Housing Authority.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't know if that represents the entire entry. What was, give me the line again, the page on the line?
So it's page 3, line
Yep.
4. This is payments and
Yep.
taxes. We can do it offline as a follow-up.
Okay, and it looks like there was pretty significant decline from 16 to 17.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll check, but someone's indicated housing authorities. Stop me getting my right here.
Seeing no other lights, you may continue, Mr. O'Brien.
I'm sorry?
I said there's no other questions. Oh,
Okay.
no, it's all right, that one just popped up, sorry. Councilor Condon.
Using the 1.75 shift, $11.30, do you have any examples of how that would affect, say, the average two-family, the average single, the average three-family? What could they expect for an increase or a decrease?
Sure. In your handout, in what I'll refer to as the second package, and I'll show it to you in a moment. Counselor, kind of looks like that. The second package.
Second to last page.
And I should probably mention that one of our employees who formerly was with us in the assessors had drafted this program a number of years ago. We still utilize it, and sometimes there can be issues with rounding with a penny if you see any discrepancies. But back to Councilor Condon's question, in the bottom of that form, you see property class, condo, one family, two family, and your first column shows the value that we've come up with this year for the average in that class. And then second column shows what their tax bill would be if you were to go to the 1130 rate, which again is the shift with no residential exemption. Next column over gets into now the discussion with the residential exemption. If you notice above, you'll see a different proposed rate of $14.17. So you can kind of see how the rate is going to increase a bit when we introduce the residential exemption, if in fact that's your decision. And again, that's broken out by the different property classes, one family, two family. What I don't have there, Counselor, I think I heard from you, was a comparison to last year's. I do have something else in there that I think compares the value. I'm sorry, I do have, I should have numbered these pages, but from that one you were just looking at, if you'll come forward about 3, and on this one, what my numbers don't show is the resident. On this handout, up above, if you're keying in on one class, say the single family, and you look, what I'm telling you is in fiscal 17, the average single is 367 on value, and to the right of that, the tax bill will be 5208. But what you need to remember is down below, the bottom of the page, I have the proposed residential dollar amount, so you would be subtracting that from the 5208. I present it both ways because there's some property that don't qualify for the exemption, so we like to see the tax bill under both scenarios. And in here, you do get your prior years that you were asking about, Counselor, both value, rate, and the exemption that was in play for those years. So for 17, the average single family is assessed at $367,536. If they qualify and receive our residential exemption, their tax bill will be $5208 minus the $1962 that's down below.
Councilor Klein, are you all set? Councilor O'Malley, for the second time?
I just wanted, it was mostly just a point of information. The residential exemption credit that you have here on the bottom, that's specifically for single families, correct? Or is it the same for condos, two families?
No, it's the same across the board. If I own that large apartment building over there, and that was my primary residence, I would qualify. I pay 22 million in taxes, but I get 1,900 off. Any residential property qualifies, Council, if it's your primary residence. In any residential property.
I guess my understanding was it was 30% off of your tax bill. So
And
wouldn't that be
that's
different?
true. That's true. Again, I think it's in there, but the calculation is we take the entire class of residential property, which is about 5 billion, and we divide it by the number of residential properties, which is 11,118, something like that. That produces an average residential value. That sheet that was very colorful at the end, if you open that up, I'll point it at you. It's a great program, but there's almost too much information on there. Yeah, so somewhere over in the right side column, down a few, shows average residential value, 461, I think it was this year. Do you see see that? Is it 461?
461.5.
Yeah. So the vote that you take when you talk about a percentage, the percentage is then calculated on that 461 figure. And what that produces this year is 138,000, bump, bump, bump. And then the tax bill is calculated by giving the taxpayer that dollar amount. So again, I could own a $22 million building and live in it as my residence, and I would get that $1,900 off, as does the condominium over here that's only valued at $110,000. So there's a real graduated spread there.
Thank you for explaining that.
Okay.
Councilor D'Angelo?
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Assessor, for coming forward tonight. So I just want to make sure we present both sides, and I'll probably end up voting for this again, as I'm split every year on this, because on one side, I really enjoy giving our residential owners a tax break like that. But there is the other side as well, is that, you know, if you live in a two-family or three-family, if you live in a bigger apartment building all the way up, your taxes are going up, and they're going up significantly, and they're going up to the point where, you know, I think it's, on the two-family, it's roughly 50-something bucks a month each unit, if you scale it out, you know, I mean, so for the year, on a two-family, the estimated average is $5,200 a year in taxes, so, you know, it used to be that taxes were just, you can make the argument that, oh, well, they're just factored into the cost of the whole thing. I don't think you can make that argument anymore. You know, once you take out a mortgage payment and then the taxes and the insurance and the water and everything else, there's people who are going to be upside down or potentially upside down or a break-even situation on rental properties throughout the city, of which there's a lot of 2 and 3 family. And now all of a sudden, instead of fixing the porch, or instead of doing the boiler over, or instead of, you know, doing some upgrade, the money isn't there. And as a result, I think there's a downside to that. So again, I'm probably going to vote for this again, as I have last year. I've been split because I like the fact that we're cutting the residential. But at the same time, I just want to make sure we're painting both sides, that they're, you know, it's got to come from somewhere, because all we're really doing is shifting. Just want everybody at home and in the audience to recognize that's really all we're doing is shifting, and we're creating, essentially to me, and I know we've had this argument in the past, I don't want to belabor it too much, but to me, we're creating another class. What we're saying is these multifamilies are businesses and they're commercial endeavors. I can see that on some of them, on the larger ones, but on 2s and 3s, I think oftentimes those are closely held family properties that the family starts off living in it, and then over a period of time, the family will age out, and they'll keep that. They might not have money in the stock market. That's their retirement. That's their investment. And I think, unfortunately, you know, they're kind of the ones who have to pay the most price here. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor D'Angelo. Councilor Matheson.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. This is something that I know we've gone over in the past, but just for our general edification, I'm looking at the LA4 and the property type designation. I see 101, 102, 104. Does 101 represent single-family homes? 102, two-family homes? Is that right?
Yeah, I'll read down that list if you'd like it. So it's single family.
Thank you.
That next category, the 102, is actually residential condominiums.
Okay.
Next category, you can see by the head count there, it's small, 30. That's a little bit of an oddball. That could be 2 buildings on one site. It can be property that's in construction, partial, because we have to stop the clock on a certain date and value what's there. So it may not be a full functioning property at that time. The next two categories, the 104 is our two-family houses, and then the 105 is our three-family houses.
What about 4 or more?
I'm sorry?
4 or more family houses?
The next category that says 111 through 125, 111 is 4 to 8 residential units, and a 112 is 9 units and above. And then there's some other less subtle categories. The next category, the 130, is vacant land. And then there's an open space category that we don't have anything classified under, followed by our commercial properties.
That's the 300 to the 300.
That's the 300 code. This is a state, it's a land use code. It's throughout
Right.
Commonwealth of Massachusetts for the edification. The 400 code is industrial property. And then it jumps down to chapter land, cranberry bogs and golf courses. We don't have any. Then the 012, 013, that's referred to as mixed use, and that's the hair salon with the apartment above, the mixed components, residential, commercial. We tax accordingly with 2 different rates. And then the last 7 or so categories are all classes of what's called personal property, which I've always felt is a weak wording. It's business-related personal property. It's all the stuff in the building.
Yeah.
The
It's got plant and
accountants.
equipment,
Yes,
property
exactly.
inside the plant.
Yep.
What about 501, 502? Because those have 189, 198 parcels.
Yeah, the difference in those, 502 is a mass corporation. Different items are taxed. We could be 2 different businesses side by side with all the same assets. But if you're a corp, you only have to report items that are defined as machinery. And the 501 has to report everything from the clock on the wall to the pencil on the desk. That's a sole proprietor and an LLC and a couple of the categories, but it's differentiated from corporation. 502 is the corporation.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Councilor Kennan?
Yes, and thank you, Madam President. I want to comment briefly on what Councilor D'Angelo had said. It is, I certainly understand my colleague, but it is a matter of philosophy as much as anything else. When this was adopted, I was an initial sponsor, a co-sponsor, and then a sponsor all the way up to 30% at every level. The idea behind this was simply that we would, encourage home ownership rather than rental properties, because that brings more stability to our city, more stability to the schools with mobility rates through rentals is a challenge for us. And also, it is the best affordable housing program that the city has ever done for those who would choose to actually buy and live here. And it has accomplished that in a great way, particularly for those who are looking on the entry side of getting into the market, which is typically at the condo type of level or the single family home. Those who are have the average condo here in the city have to only pay $1,500 in taxes a year. Those with the average single family, $3,000, and those with a 2-family, $5,000, where they have rents, particularly those have gone up over the last few years. They have help doing that. So that was the reason behind it. There's clearly a philosophy that says all homeowners are homeowners. Those who voted on it initially, I believed, much like I did and still do, that this is, no matter how you look at it, if you have rental property and you don't live there, it is a business. And it is a business to make money, not only in the short term, but in the long term, and there's nothing wrong with that, it is a great and worthwhile endeavor, but that sets it apart from our commercial rate. So this put us more in a different rate, but headed toward a commercial rate. And in fact, those people who have invested in the city of Malden over the last 5 years have seen their property values go up by 95.2%. So it has been a great investment. Much of that investment certainly in equity in the property, but that's where I'll end. It is an investment. When it's an investment, it is typically a business. And finally, with that said, I would move adoption of these rates. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Cannon. We still have some discussion to take place. Councilor DiMaria.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien, for coming in to talk about that awful subject of taxes. That's something none of us really want to talk about, but as I'm just quickly looking at the numbers here, you know, 10 short years ago, we were really not doing very well as a country, and in the last 2 years, single-family homes have, from these calculations, their value's gone up $57,000. Condos have gone up $40,000. So it's encouraging to know that the city we all invest in and live in is going in the right direction. So I thank you for your work.
Thank you, Councilor DiMaria. Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Madam President. I too want to echo the thought that we are heading in the right direction. That the idea of shifting the taxes to these, as my colleague from Ward 6 has mentioned, to businesses, and encouraging the home ownership of new buyers and having people who own their homes, live in their homes, we stabilize our community so much more. So the idea that folks who have invested in property that they are feeling we've got a high tax rate for them, I think that's the cost of their doing business. And I think the numbers seem to speak for themselves, that their investments have been paying off, the values have been going up. You know, the occupancy rate is very, very high. Renters want to come to Malden to rent here, and so that business has some risks, but those risks have been very, very minor and have turned out to be positive. So I too support the idea of this as much as we can, this 30% residential factor, and would also endorse the idea of moving forward with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councilor Anderson. Anyone else wish to speak? I see no other lights. It will pop up at the last moment. Yes, Councilor Matheson.
I always get a last moment.
I want to say something too, so.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out that we're talking about two different things here. One is the rate shift between residential and commercial industrial property. And the other is the residential tax exemption, where if you own and live in your home, if it's owner occupied, you pay 30% less based on the average value of homes in the residential class. Those are the two things we're talking about, right? Because I feel like the discussion kind of blurred, you know, what we were talking about when we said shift. Sometimes we're referring to the owner-occupied tax abatement. Other times we're referring to the shift of 1.75.
Right.
Okay. So it's a dual discussion.
That's right, and I didn't feel that we got to the second part, to be honest with you. It did start with, I think, Councilor D'Angelo.
That's what happens when we start talking, right? Because we start, once we flush it all out, we start making motions. But
also,
I know you want to talk some more about
yeah, go ahead.
the
But
nuance.
also, on one of your points about 30%, understand that that's...
It's an average.
Right.
It's not 30% of your home's value.
Correct.
We collect all homes. We average their value.
Right.
Then we take 30% of the
Yes.
average home
Yes.
value and apply it to your home.
Okay, 461,000 is the number this year. Average residential value. That includes that 22 million building over there and the little condo. 461,000 and change. Your vote is, I believe it's 30%.
That's the average.
Of residents skewed by the I keep referring to this building like I do own it.
You're not referring to it.
It's skewed by that, by, you know, the big numbers, but they're included because they're residential property. They're
If someone
included-
sleeps in it, it's paying the residential rate, correct?
Right, if it's habitational, yeah, it's
Right.
residential. So that 461 figure that's in your handout is where the calculation will go this year. Your vote, 30%, will be calculated on the 461 figure, which will give us 138,000 and change. And the ultimate residential rate will then be multiplied on the, I lost my train of thought. The 138 will be the exempted portion from your value. So again, my apartment building that's worth 22 million, will reduce that by 138,000. No great shakes, right? But the condo over here that's only worth 150,000 will be reduced by 138,000.
Yeah, the major beneficiaries of the condo owners, for sure.
Or the lower value properties.
Lower value
Sure.
properties,
It's
exactly.
two ends of the spectrum there.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I did hear some discussion about multifamily homes that are rented out, and how that's a business. Just to be clear, that's not paying the commercial rate. They're still paying the residential rate.
Residential rate.
Right, so
Yeah.
when we're talking about a shift, I heard shift being used interchangeably. I think what some of the councils were referring to was the shift based on owner-occupied tax abatement that is being applied to owner-occupied homes, but not to homes that are being rented out.
Right.
It doesn't put them in the commercial rate, it just means they're not qualified for the tax abatement.
And the shift, which is what we opened up with, is the initial allocating, if you will. Residential, commercial, your vote of a shift already
That's what the shift is.
$1.75 and $1 when you do the shift. The next discussion will be about the residential exemption, which that will all take place, because it's a shifting mechanism to a degree. That shift will all take place within the residential class.
So, anyway, I'm gonna shut up now, I'll let you do your presentation. And I know this is your second year doing it, and I can see you've done a great job, so.
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor, Mr. O'Brien, yes, we'd like you to continue with your presentation because
I'm done.
oh, you're done? Okay, well,
No, I was just joking. On the residential exemption,
correct.
the Board of Assessors would recommend that you continue at the 30% level, as we have done here the last few years. The residential exemption was introduced in 2008, initially 5%, baby steps, and then we quickly rose up to the 30% level, which is where it's at today and what is being proposed for fiscal 17. The 30% level will exempt 138,000 from every property that qualifies. And the true,
1,380.
no, so if your property is worth 500,000
Right, okay.
and you receive the exemption, we're going to remove 138,000 worth of value. So we'll only tax you on the 500 minus the 138. And then there's still a tax rate to be applied on that. And that figure, which represents the true number, is 19, it's in here somewhere, 1962.08 is the actual dollar amount. I like to say the savings for everyone, but that's not true because the apartment, he may get it, but his net tax bill is still up there. So the Board of Assessors' recommendation is to continue at the 30% level. And that produces the rates that you see reflected on the very first handout of $14.17 residential and $22.04 for commercial. And unless there's other questions, I would ask, go ahead, Councilman.
I do have a question, but I do have something else to say. No?
No.
I guess my question, Councilor Matheson touched on it a little bit because there always is confusion because people do think I'm getting a 30% tax, reduction. And that is not correct. It is a graduated tax reduction. But we do have a number of single-family homes that do not qualify for this reduction. Does that still hold true? Where the tax rate is actually higher for them because their value of their property is so much higher than the average?
Right, but just, I want to restate that, they still qualify. He still gets it, the 22 million guy.
Not the 22, let's talk about an $800,000 home.
He'll still receive the exemption if he qualifies.
But
next-
isn't it true that because you've inflated the tax rate,
That's correct.
that they wind up paying more money than
That's
they
true.
would if the
That is true.
residential tax exemption was not in place?
That is true.
Okay.
And if you go to that colorful one and go one page in front of it, there's a break-even analysis. Compliments to Mr. Donnelly.
Mr. Donnelly. Thank you, Mr. Donnelly.
And if you look down, so on the left column, you have level of assessment. So now this is all properties, all residential. The left-hand column, when you get into the red there, 650, 700,000, you're approaching the break-even point. And then if you look to the right and carry through on those figures, you'll see that the property assessed at 650 still gets a break, but I think it's only at 96.58, and then the next one down is where it shifts, and I believe that individual is, no, I'm sorry, that individual also is getting a $46 reduction net. But then after that, all the properties that are above that level do in fact, what you indicated, Councilor, end up paying net more in taxes. Again, even though they're receiving the exemption.
And I, like I've heard my colleagues say, I am going to vote for this, but it also, and I know we've had many discussions about this over the past years, but as these property values rise and some of these big homes start to break up into condos, I actually think it's putting us in a worse position, from a neighborhood perspective, because we're not, allowing the residential, there's no way, I know your hands are tied, but to give a residential tax exemption to those folks, 30% is the fair way to me, not 30% of the assessed value. If I could write the rules, if I could rewrite the rules you have to go by, that's the way I would do it, 30% of every home.
Of every
would get
home.
that.
And
Of
most,
every home would
most
get that.
people, most folks think that that's the case, to be honest with you.
Right, so I just wanted to point out once again that there, are people out there who are very unhappy that they wind up through this mechanism being a single-family owner who feels that they contribute to the community, who keep their property up, who want to stay in Malden and aren't moving out to the suburbs, and they're being penalized for staying there through this process. Just another facet, I think, of what everyone needs to understand as we vote for this. It's only a handful of people. I think there's about
89 this year.
89 properties.
Coming from the single, two-family, three-family, and condo class, because we know my guy at 22
Right.
is getting it.
But I think, there are a handful of people who are not benefiting from this.
89 this year.
Yes, 89 this year, so just wanted to get that out there so that it was recognized. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. O'Brien, if you are finished with your presentation, I'm going to open the public hearing. Okay.
And I am.
You are? Okay, thank you, and it was a very nice job. So I declare the public hearing open. Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the residential tax exemption? Please come to the podium, state your name and address. Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Seeing and hearing no one, I declare that portion of the public hearing closed. Is there anyone wishing to speak in opposition? If there's anyone wishing to speak in opposition, please come to the podium. Seeing and hearing no one, I declare that portion of the public hearing closed. On Councilor Kinnon, please, Councilor Kinnon, do you want to speak again?
I just want to move adoption.
On Councilor Kinnon's motion to move adoption, seconded by Councilor Crowe. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Residential tax exemption has been adopted. Residential tax rate